The Wilds Files is an immigration law podcast. The content shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The views expressed by the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization or law firm. Listeners should seek the counsel of a qualified attorney to address specific legal concerns. By listening, you acknowledge that the host and guests are not providing professional or personalized legal advice. Welcome to the Wilds Files. The files are open.
Everybody, and welcome back to the Wilds Files, your go-to podcast for everything immigration law. I'm one of your hosts, Josh Wilds, and today we're opening up a very exciting file. I'm super happy to have her here, Nora Anderson, one of our greatest business lawyers, actually one of our greatest lawyers in general. I mean, I feel like you could do a little bit of everything.
I could do a little bit of everything. I'm grateful to be really passionate about immigration law. I actually ended up coming to this field because although I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, I actually went to international school. And learning so much about other people, where they come from, and how similar they are to me being from, a place that is not known for its immigrant population, has just been a wonderful experience. And so, I'm really passionate about what I do. You can ask anybody in the firm, but it's one of those things where yes, I'm in it for the people, and yes, I'm in it for the beliefs that I have that everyone should be able to travel here and take a visit to America.
Awesome. And you mentioned, just because I'm genuinely curious about learning about all these different cultures and stuff in school. Do you speak multiple languages? Is there any particular culture that you enjoyed learning about the most?
Yeah. So I grew up in Ohio, but I come from a family that is French Canadian. My dad's family is from Manchester, New Hampshire, which was a famous landing point for a lot of French Canadians in the early part of the 20th century. So I ended up, studying French in high school and college. I go to a French language church these days, and I help represent one of our clients with significant operations in France. But I think one of my favorite cultures to learn about has definitely been any that has good food, which is all of them.
Right. I'm the same way, by the way. I speak that language.
One of my prized possessions is a lot of times if you're my client or if you're the firm's client and you work with me, after you receive your residency or if we get a big win, I'll ask you, what's your favorite type of food and where can I find it in New York City? And
that's great.
It's been really satisfying being able to go all around the city and travel around the world without really leaving the train system.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I love that. And I think that's one of the greatest things about what we do is that because we're learning about so many different cultures, it's like traveling the world without even having to get on the plane sometimes. We learn so many things. We're talking to so many different people, so many different accents, so many different backgrounds, religions, races, whatever it may be. We're very lucky for that. You mentioned Ohio and a little bit about your upbringing. And before we get into the topic, and just for our viewers and listeners out there, today we're going to be talking about non-immigrant visas, H-1Bs, and that new $100,000 fee that's got everybody on their toes. Before we get to that, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, maybe where you went to college, law school.
Yeah.
You mentioned how you got into immigration, but anything else you want to share with them?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio. I was going to say legally I have to say go Bucks, but I did in fact attend Ohio State University for law school. I decided to go a little bit out of the way to attend Ohio Wesleyan University for my undergraduate degrees, which are in sociology and French. But I've been an Ohio resident for most of my life until I decided to take a step out of my comfort zone and move to New York in 2021. I originally ended up at a big ranked law firm, but I really enjoy the freedom and the just depth and breadth of people that you get to work with in a smaller boutique setting, which is what brought me to Wilds and Weinberg a little over a year ago.
Yeah, well, flew by.
I know, I really did.
Yeah.
I genuinely do enjoy what I do here, and I can't wait to work with all the clients that we get to speak to. I think one of my favorite things about working here is that we do consults, right? There are so many other law firms, especially big law firms, where they're just like, oh, we don't do consults, we don't do waivers, we don't do this, we only represent companies. And, although I am part of the business team and we do represent companies, ultimately the way to keep the company happy is to keep the employees happy too.
Absolutely. And I think that's what sets us apart from a lot of immigration law firms is that, some firms, they only do business visas or they only do litigation or they only do family type cases, whereas we do everything. We have 5 different departments, all dedicated to U.S. immigration law. So everything A to Z within the immigration world, we stick in our lane. Anything outside of that, we go to other professionals. We won't even touch it.
Yeah, don't ask us to do tax law, please.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, that's one of my least favorite things is when the taxes and the money and the finances are involved, because then it gets super complicated. But luckily, I got good relationships for that. And from an immigration perspective, it's just a matter of connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Speaking the language, but connecting the dots. Anyways, thank you for that introduction. Really appreciate it. And I'm excited to talk to you today. So let's just jump right into it. Before we even get to the actual visa type and where we stand today, why don't we start from the basics, pulling the lens back a little bit. What is a visa, or more specifically, what is a non-immigrant visa?
Yeah, so there's two types of visas that the U.S. government can hand you. And the first type is called a non-immigrant visa, and the second type is called an immigrant visa. An immigrant visa is the legal term for permanent residency, or either, going further down that line, a green card. What it does is it allows you to live in the United States permanently, indefinitely, with unlimited work authorization. There are very, very, very few jobs that green card holders cannot have, and they're usually with the US government. A non-immigrant visa, on the other hand, allows you to remain in the United States for a limited purpose for a set amount of time. It has a start date and an end date. We famously use letters of the alphabet to talk about our non-immigrant visas, right? I know one of the ways that young lawyers often learn is quite literally A is for ambassador,
Yeah.
which is very true. Our A visas are for ambassadors, foreign heads of state, people who work, for their governments who come and travel to the United States.
Yeah.
But it's literally A through U?
Yeah, something like that. But it's funny because you say A for ambassador, and that kind of flits nicely. But then there's also no method to some of the other madness. Like a P visa is for an athlete. Like what?
I guess you could say professional athlete.
Yeah, that's a good one actually. I'm trying to play
Q
word
visa.
association.
No, I was
going
going
to
to say the Q visa is legally it's not just for Epcot. But
Right.
it is. You often
true.
see people who work
Yeah.
at Epcot have Q visas.
I'm gonna play a game. Maybe I'll play with my daughter or something, like
Yeah.
the letters, and see how creative we can get. But yes, non-immigrant versus immigrant. It's basically temporary versus permanent. The one caveat I would add is on the immigrant side of things. The green card allows you to live here permanently and pretty much indefinitely, but you have to be very careful that you're not abroad for too long. All too often, we have clients or prospective clients call us who got stuck outside of the United States for one reason or another. And this happened a lot during COVID, as you can imagine.
I was going to say a lot of people
Yeah.
were caring for elderly or sick or ill family members.
Yeah, exactly. And the government gives you a presumption that you abandoned your lawful permanent residence if you're not permanently residing here. So they look at over 6 months being abroad, and then once you're abroad for a year, that's like a really bad marker. But besides that, I mean, you hit everything on the nail. And you spoke a little bit about the alphabet. We mentioned A and a couple of the other letters tangentially. But what is the infamous H-1B?
Yeah. So if we have to talk, to the American public about a letter visa, the one that most American citizens will probably have heard of is the H-1B visa. I think there's kind of a misconception that the H-1B visa is a general work visa. It's not. The H-1B visa is for something called a specialty occupation, right? Or a professional occupation. Now, you and I both know that everyone's a professional, right? If you show up to your work and you're passionate about what you do, you're a professional, right? But in the immigration law context, a specialty occupation worker or a professional has two sides to the same coin. The work that you do has to require a bachelor's degree, and you have to have that bachelor's degree. So it's a dual-sided analysis. So for example, our jobs as lawyers, right? Josh and I are both admitted as attorneys in the state of New York. And not only do we need at least a bachelor's degree, we need a law degree. I have a 4-year degree in sociology and French. You have a 4-year degree in
Business.
And then after that, we went to law school and we got an additional 3-year degree. And then we had to take a licensing exam, the bar exam. So our jobs are H-1B eligible jobs. And in fact, Wild and Weinberg has not only had H-1B workers here in the past as attorneys, but we have some here today too. So we're really grateful to have that ability to hire people that we need to hire with the skills that we need to have.
Absolutely. So just to kind of summarize it in its most general terms, it's for somebody that has the right degree in a job that requires a degree.
Right. And it's not that the job needs to require like a degree generally. It's that that degree needs to be narrow enough to be considered, to be considered a narrow enough field, right? I can't just say, I want to hire a copywriter, right? And I would like them to have an English degree, right? because you can satisfy that type of, position with an English degree or a humanities degree or a government degree or even a classics degree, right? It's got to be narrow enough. And that's why we often see the H-1B in scientific and technical positions. It's a favorite of Silicon Valley, right? As much as I took one course on C++ in college, I am not an appropriate person to write code, right? Google was not going to hire me anytime soon to be able to refine the search function. But understanding that people who possess that technical, specialized body of knowledge, yes, they are eligible for the H-1B visa. And so we see this in a lot of jobs like engineering, chemistry, pharmaceuticals, physicians. A lot of our physicians are on H-1B, lawyers, and again, scientists, professors, people whose jobs require significant education to be able to operate in that job. It's not just, I'm going to walk down Fifth Avenue and I'm going to point at someone and they're going to be considered a person who's appropriate for an H-1B visa. Yeah. It's actually a pretty narrow field of people.
And we keep talking about degrees, and this might sound like a silly question, but everything within the immigration landscape and world has a definition. So what is a degree for an H-1B? What if I have a degree from abroad? What if I went to if I have an associate's degree? What is a degree?
Yeah. So the United States considers a degree to be either actually an American four-year degree or equivalent to an American four-year degree. We see this a lot become an issue with a lot of Canadians, actually, would you believe it? And that is because a lot of Canadian undergraduate degrees are three-year degrees, right? So it's possible to turn, some secondary education or additional post-secondary education. I know a lot of our clients from India, they'll have a three-year undergraduate degree and a three-year master's degree. Combining that, it becomes an American two-year master's degree and an American four-year undergraduate degree. But, ultimately what we have to do to show that you possess the appropriate credentials, if you're not US educated, is send your diplomas and your transcripts to an educational evaluator who will tell us, according to the American government system, you do or do not have the equivalent of an American bachelor's degree. Yeah. You can also, in some cases, use educational experience. Every 3 years, or practical experience, I should say, employment experience, every 3 years of what's called progressive employment experience is equal to a single year of, actual in-classroom educational training. So, if I have that 3-year Canadian degree, but then I've spent 5 years working in my field, we may be able to qualify you as somebody who has the equivalent to an American four-year degree. Yeah. Again, having the degree that you need is only half of the equation. The other half is whether the work that you will perform in the States requires that type of degree to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that explanation. And I went to law school and became a lawyer to avoid math, but sometimes it's required. And this is one of the times where it's absolutely required. And sometimes we have clients who've never even gone to college or university in any respect, but they're eligible for the H-1B because they have over 12 years of paid work experience and can get them the equivalent of a degree in, let's say, communications or data science or business or whatever it may be. So
I've really actually worked with a fair number of people who have received trade education or vocational education, but it's at their work experience is at such a high level that we end up being able to classify them for example, electrical or mechanical engineering positions, right? Yeah. If you're able to be one of those people that, you have training as an electrician or training as a machinist, or, operating, highly specialized machinery, we can take that experience and we can try and help you turn that into a formal four-year degree, even though you may never have enrolled in a traditional four-year college.
Absolutely. So you have the degree, you have the job offer that, which is also half the battle sometimes in its own right. But you have the degree, you have the right job, you're ready to go for the H-1B, but you can't. You can't just say, hey, I want an H, I'm here, you get online. That's not how it works. There's an entire process and a lottery behind it. Could you tell us a little bit about the process, the lottery, and how you're even able to seek out or apply for an H-1B?
Yeah. So like most work visas that we have here in the United States, the H-1B is what's called a closed visa, right? It is a visa that only permits you to work for your sponsoring employer, and it's entity specific. So if your, employer is Wilds and Weinberg LLP, but we also have, a spin-off of Wilds and Weinberg LLC, you're actually limited to working for the named employer. And if you have to change entities, that's a different question. So what we do is, by law, one of the things that happened when we created the H-1B visa is that a lot of professional interests, usually among them labor unions, said, we're concerned that a lot of companies might try to be bad faith actors in the situation. We need a numerical limitation on H-1B visas. And so there's a limitation of 85,000 per year. That's split into two portions. It's the 65,000, what's called general pool, and there's 20,000 visas reserved for graduates of U.S. advanced degree programs. So if you're an American student and you have an American master's degree, an American PhD, or an American professional degree, like an MD or a DDS, or again, even a law degree, you have a slight advantage when you are being selected, but it is never a guarantee. So because demand always exceeds or outstrips supply, there's a lottery that happens in March of each year where your employer enters you into one or both of those pools. The $20,000 US advanced degree pool is picked first. If you're not selected in that pool, you're poured over into the general pool and you have a second bite at the apple. This is why we see a lot of people come to the United States to do a master's degree or to do an advanced degree so that they can have that advantage, when they're going into the lottery. Again, it's never a guarantee, but it's often an advantage.
Well, it gives you higher odds. So people always like to ask what are the odds of winning the lottery? And when we say lottery, it's literally a lottery. They do it online, but it's like being pulled your name out of a hat. And they even call it the cap, which is literally like a cap. So it's like being pulled out of the cap.
Yeah.
But the everybody gets the same odds, more or less. Obviously, and if you're in that 20,000, you get an extra advantage. But it depends on how many people actually sign up for the lottery. So a couple of years, in the last few years, maybe you know the number off the top of your head, but it was over 200, 300,000. So you're looking at odds of, anywhere between 15 to 22%, give or take, of winning.
Yeah, and I did want to say this, I usually quote people between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4.
Yeah.
This year it was much closer to 1 in 3, but I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. And the reason that I brought up entity specific early on is that now they do it by person. If you have multiple job offers, even legitimate job offers,
Yeah,
right?
it's true.
You used to have one ticket per person and job offer. And so what ended up happening a couple of years ago was that related companies tried to game the system by putting in a ticket for their employees in different subsidiaries. Now it's by person. If you are selected and you have multiple job offers, you, the employee, get to pick.
Yeah. And just in terms of dates and timing and everything, the lottery takes place every year around the same time.
March.
In
Yep.
March. And usually find out sometimes towards the end of the month if you've been selected. If you have been, that gives you the chance to actually apply for the H-1B. And we're going to talk about what an application generally requires in a moment. But the lottery is just to be able to even attempt the H-1B. You have to attempt the lottery in order to attempt the H. So I think a common misconception that is often spoken about in the mainstream media is that this H-1B is for everybody and they're taking over American jobs and there's too many of them out there. But it's not true. There's this finite amount, and it's a difficult hurdle to even get to the point where you can even apply for it in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is just a really small exception to that lottery I want to talk about, and that's if you're going to work for a university, the U.S. government, or a nonprofit research organization. So a number of people in my family are involved in academia. Both of my parents are professors. If you are being hired by an institution of higher learning, right, a college or a university, they're nonprofit, you are likely, but never guaranteed, to be exempt from that lottery. Right? And the reason is we trust our universities. We trust our colleges. We represent a couple institutions here at Wilds and Weinberg, and they need to be able to hire the people, from overseas or who are here, on their own student visas or on even J1, visiting researcher or scholar visas, right? To be able to teach their courses, to do research, to otherwise further American academics. Again, the same is true for the U.S. government. If you receive, an offer from a U.S. government entity, it's usually the federal government, although sometimes it can be state or local, you are able to receive that visa without going through the traditional lottery.
Yeah.
That being said, you're locked in. If you want to change from, let's say, a government employer to a for-profit employer, just because you have the H-1B doesn't mean that you can do it. You actually still have to go through the lottery again.
Yeah, and these employers that are not subject to the lottery, they're what's known as cap exempt, meaning exempt from the cap. So again, it's not this is kind of a silly way of putting it out there, but for people to visualize it, if you're subject to lottery, you put your name in the cap, and if they select it out of the hat, you're good. If you're working for one of those employers, you don't even need to put your name in the hat or in the cap. You could do it at any time of the year. So you're selected for the lottery, you're working for cap exempt, whatever it may be, you're finally at that point where you can put together an H-1B application. Now, obviously, we have our own little tips and tricks about how we do it, and every law firm has their own ways of doing certain things, but in general, very general terms, what goes into an actual H-1B petition?
Yeah. So the first thing we have to do is we have to pick a job code for you, right? So when we think of jobs, some titles are really descriptive, right? Lawyer. You kind of know what we do for a living, right?
Although sometimes I don't really know what I'm doing. It's like,
but if you were to ask a
fake it
person
till
on
you
the
make it,
street,
right?
right?
Yeah.
They kind of have an idea of what we do. A lot of people in my family think I go to court. I've never been to court. You will never see me at immigration court. I respect my colleagues who go every day. It's just not me, right? Or nurse, right? Everyone knows what a nurse does. And I don't want to pick on the computer people here, but if you tell me that you work as a senior solutions architect, I don't know what you do all day. So we have to pick a job code for you, right? And we have to be really careful with that job code because, sometimes those job codes say, oh, you need an advanced degree to do this job. You need a bachelor's degree to do the job, or sometimes you need a 2-year degree to do this job. And with that job code that we help you pick, right? And we want to work with you because you know your job better than we know your job, right? Josh has his business degree.
Yeah, exactly.
I took one course on C++, particularly for people who are working in specialized or technical fields. You know what you do, and you're able to help explain it to us. So we pick that job code, with your help and with your employer's help, and we are able to pick the wage, right? So what we do is we go and we see what the appropriate wage would be for somebody in that job field in your geographic area where you're going to work. And at what level, right? If you've just graduated from college, this may be an entry-level position. But if you, are coming here off of another visa, that may not be a student visa, or you may have, previous experience, you may be, a mid-level or even a managerial position. So we want to make sure that, not only are we reporting this to the government accurately, but that you're being paid the same as your U.S. counterparts.
And often more. I just want to caveat that the wage, the way they refer to it in the statutes and the regulations, is that it's a quote-unquote prevailing wage. So they want it to be even over average because the government doesn't want you to take the American job. So again, you see about a lot in the news about the H-1B is affecting everything, but it's actually businesses have to pay more sometimes for H-1B workers.
I have to, if I'm a business and I hire an H-1B worker, I have to pay you the same as an American worker, and I have to pay the lawyers to do the visa for you. Right?
So there's extra costs involved that people aren't often talking about or thinking about until they get to the point where they have to do an H-1B.
Right, and this is why it's fairly difficult for a lot of F1 students, international students, to find an employer who will petition them for H-1B, because the employer's question is, okay, so you have great qualifications, you have good experience, but I have to pay extra fees for you for the visa. Why can't I just hire an American?
Yeah.
And that's a really good question, right? So you do have to be kind of a little bit standout in your field to be able to get this type of sponsorship.
Yeah.
Just doing a little myth busting here.
Exactly, yeah. So you pick the code, the job code, you get the prevailing wage that's set. That's all through the Department of Labor, which is one of the agencies we're dealing with. What do you do with that? Maybe if you want to just quickly mention the LCA and all that stuff.
Yeah, so we actually file something called a labor condition application, an LCA, with the U.S. Department of Labor. One of the things that you may notice if that an H-1B is being filed for you or being filed for one of your coworkers is that we actually have to put a little slip of paper up at work. Sometimes I see them here at Wild and Weinberg, right next to the posters, the wage and hour posters, right next to the sink where we have our coffee and their tea, saying, hey, we're hiring an H-1B worker. This is what we want to hire them as, and this is how much we're going to pay them. So there is a lot of salary transparency when it comes, and particularly here in a salary transparency, place like New York City.
I just broke my pen. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Stressed a little. But in all seriousness, we file that with the U.S. Department of Labor, and the U.S. Department of Labor says, sounds good for anywhere from 1 year to up to 3 years. So we put it together along with the job offer to you, the credentials that you have, whether that is education, licenses, letters from former employers attesting to your experience and or your skills, education evaluations, translations if you were educated in a language that's not English. Shout out to, again, my French Canadians. But understanding that we package this all together and we send it off to the government.
Yeah.
The government has the right to ask questions back, right? You may have heard this, the dreaded RFE, right? The request for evidence. The government has the right to say, we reviewed the things that you sent us. We don't actually think we have enough information to make a determination, or we need more information to make a determination. And probably the most common one that we see is specialty occupation.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
And what that means is, going back to the rules of who can get H-1B, right? Yes, you have a degree. That's really not up, for question. We submitted your diplomas and your transcripts and et cetera, and particularly with people who have American degrees. But the question that is most often asked of H-1B applicants and their prospective employers is, does the job that you will perform need a degree to do? We usually see this in technical or specialized positions that don't require a license, right? Because let's say that I'm working as a doctor, okay? Well, to get a medical license, I have to have a medical degree, right? But particularly in our computing and our technical positions, there might be optional certifications that you can get, but you don't need a license to be, a computer engineer.
Yeah, or when you're doing provocative jobs that are not as obvious, like interior designers, which we do H-1Bs for, and things like that, they tend to question it. But so just to give it, again, an overview, so you get selected for the lottery, or you're doing a cap-exempt job.
You find an employer first.
You find an employer, you get your degree,
Yeah.
you find your employer, you get selected for the lottery or do cap-exempt. You file the LCA, which is this thing with the Department of Labor. You go through all the steps, you pick the job code, you pick the salary, that gets certified. Then you put together the application with all the documents and evidence proving that you have the degree or the right degree, proving that it's the right job and it qualifies, hopefully getting the case approved, if not dealing with a potential request for evidence. And then at that point, the H-1B petition is hopefully approved. You're good to go. If you're in the United States, if you're abroad, you still have to go for the visa stamp. And we're going to come back to that because that's relevant for what's going on today. But there's a lot of steps involved in terms of just being eligible. Yeah.
A lot of people think that I can just snap my fingers and be like, here's your visa. I wish.
Yeah. Well, then we wouldn't have a job.
Then we wouldn't have jobs. But, from a personal perspective, sometimes I kind of want to put myself out of work. But in all seriousness, though, it's the reason that if you are selected, we have a filing window of exactly second quarter, April 1st to June 30th.
Yeah.
There are a number of cases that we work on where we do, we'll start the case in April and we're going down to, June 1st, June 15th, right? Because this is all a very elaborate dance that we do with the government.
Yeah, there's a lot of work, a lot of document collection, a lot of putting it together in the right way and presenting it in a way that makes it more and more approvable. You mentioned this a little bit, so that's just the process in general. You mentioned fees. Now, there's obviously legal fees. We have our fees as lawyers, as a law firm. We still have to put food on the table for our family and our children and for all the people that we are able to help. But we're going to put those to a side for a moment, and we're just shout out. We're always work with your budget. We're always happy to help anybody. But what are the government filing fees or the fees that everybody has to pay for an H-1B? And if you don't know the number off the top of your head, don't worry. But just give us a general estimate so I can kind of get into the next segment.
Yeah. So, as we get into, the government shutdown, we're not going to really discuss that today. But one of the things that's been affected is obviously agencies don't have money. Well, not the USCIS. If you are seeking a visa or another immigration benefit, you, the applicant, or you, the company, have to pay up front. You have to pay filing fees. So as a result, USCIS operations have not been affected during the shutdown. So it depends on the size of the company that is petitioning for you. The cutoff is 25 employees. But for large employers, it's $780 filing fee, $1,500 American worker training fee, a $500 anti-fraud fee, a $600 asylum program fee, and then optional, you don't need to do this at all, but if you want to expedite the processing time, there's something called premium processing, and right now that's $28.05.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
Josh, to put you
that off the top of your head.
Thank you, Josh. It used to be $24.60. That's what it was when I first started practicing. I was speaking to one of our beloved paralegals, Paul. He's been doing this since before you and I were both born. And he was saying, back in my day, Pepperidge Farm remembers that certain filing fees used to be $30.
Yeah, which is crazy. That now it went from 30 up to upwards to thousands of dollars. So thousands of dollars in fees potentially, or hundreds depending on the size of the company, whatever it may be. That everybody has to pay that regardless of using lawyers and things like that.
Right. There's some fee breaks for smaller companies and there's some fee breaks for nonprofits. Some nonprofits are cap exempt. Most of them actually are not. But understanding that, you have to pay the government to make a decision on your application.
Yeah, and the reason why I bring that up, the fees, is because I want to now bring this to what I really wanted to speak to you about, which is what's going on in the current events. it would cost anywhere from hundreds to thousands, legal fees aside. What happened, and what is the government trying to charge now on certain cases?
Yeah. September 19th, it was a Friday, and I was ready to go home and spend time with my family. And then the government hit us with the $100,000 question, right? So we have all these fees, right? And almost unilaterally, your employer has to pay them, right? They can't be shifted onto you. What the administration said is, for everyone who's getting a quote unquote new H-1B, you have to pay $100,000 extra just for fun, for drama, to protect the American workforce. Again, going over our fact that we discussed earlier, you have to pay H-1B the same workers, the same amount of pay that an American worker receives, and you have to pay all these fees and extra, compliance stuff as well. So $100,000, I don't even want to demean that by saying that's a salary. That's a good salary.
I mean,
that's a great salary.
That's life-changing money for a lot of folks. $100,000.
If you gave me $100,000, I'd be thrilled.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up the history of filing fees being less than $50 back in the day and being at thousands of dollars now. That's jumping from where we are at like 3,000 plus to 100,000 additional
per worker.
When the news came out, we were all in shock. Nobody really knew what was going on. We were all trying to read all the things that the government was putting out. I think even some parties in the government were confused. They didn't know. It was chaos. And I was going into a Jewish holiday, and it was absolute. There's no other word for it besides just chaos.
Yeah, it was really reminiscent of, I really respect my colleagues who do asylum and removal defense. It's certainly something that I cannot do, but during the last administration, or I guess now 2 administrations ago, there was an ongoing immigration lawyer joke that they just love to release new rules and regulations on Friday night.
Well, but when all we're on the way to synagogue to pray, so it's just like you can imagine the chaos. I got my kids screaming in the back. I'm getting dressed and showered, and then boom, all our clients calling us at the same time.
Yes.
So $100,000 per person. That's
per person. It wasn't even per company or per
just per
filing, just per
crazy.
Person, right?
Yeah.
If you really need this person, you're going to pay $100,000
and all the
them.
big companies in the United States were obviously freaking out because companies like Amazon, for example, really benefit from the H-1B program. They're doing thousands of these potentially a year.
Yeah,
to
they're
get
one of the
right
biggest H-1B users. Yeah.
So and for all the money in the world that these big companies have, $100,000 per person is still tremendous, and they're not going to be able to do it, nor will they want to do it.
And I think the funnier thing, at least from our perspective, is let's say that a company was like, okay, I will pay the $100,000. Did we get a link?
No, not in the beginning. In the beginning, there was no way to do it until like pretty much last week.
I think it was last week. Yeah.
There was no way to really do it. But that's sometimes the new administration, without getting political, they put things out and then kind of figure it out later, which is, this isn't the first time we're dealing with it. And, they to give them some point of respect, they have their reasons for trying to implement these things in the general sense of protecting America and protecting the American worker. That's all fine and dandy.
Right. And I was going to say,
concept.
Particularly the reason that we have an H-1B cap, as I mentioned earlier, is because of labor unions, right? So understanding, it's not one of those things where, we're mad or I don't think anyone's mad at the worker, right? It's one of those things where it's like, well, how can we protect American laborers? How can we protect the American workforce, particularly when there is, a very serious college graduate problem, right?
Yeah.
We all know people who graduated with engineering or technical degrees who, are sending off hundreds of applications and they can't get jobs, right? So it's one of those things where, we want to have a really good balance, and that's another reason why we have the lottery, right? There's some other, adjustments to the lottery that are getting tossed around, particularly when it comes to wages. But again, this is a program where if you cannot find the technical skills that you need, you can hire a foreign worker, but we don't make it easy.
Yeah.
So understanding that, the $100,000 question, and there were a lot of issues that we dealt with at the firm, because one of the things we didn't mention earlier is that although the lottery is in March, the first day that you can start on H-1B is October 1st. So putting this, into effect, it was released on September 19th and it was put into effect as of September 21st, right? That was a huge question, a huge issue for us is, because so many of our clients have already invested in this type of talent, are you going to be able to come into the United States, right? What happens if you're already here and you need a new visa, right? Let's say that, you're here, you changed your status from F1 student to H-1B worker, but you want to go visit your parents for Christmas, or you want to go home and spend the high holidays with your family, right? Can I get a visa? Is it going to cost me $100,000? What are we going to do?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of a little bit about where we stand today. But just a quick anecdote. I remember during that weekend, my wife probably wanted to kill me because I was on my phone the whole time. But people were freaking out, and we have to be there for our clients. We had people who had just traveled for the weekend before they started their job on October 1st.
I had somebody who I told to get off the plane.
Me too. Yeah. Me too. I don't even think we spoke about that together, but me too. I've had multiple calls with clients where they're like, "What do I do? Do I get on the plane? Do I go abroad? Am I going to have a job? Am I going to be able to get paid?" It was a scary time for a lot of people. And I remember I had someone who, my person wasn't actually on the plane. I don't know if yours was.
My guy was on the plane to his vacation, his prepaid non-refundable vacation.
That's crazy. My client, she was actually at the airport, had already checked into security and didn't get on the plane. And I told her, try to get thank God she booked a refundable. I don't know if she got the money back.
She's smarter than me because I never book refundable.
Yeah, but I told her leave and go back to your family. She was in France, and I said just go home and let's give it a few days and see what happens.
Yeah.
So it was absolutely crazy, but and there's been a lot of changes since then. But ups and downs and talks and press conferences and different releases and things like that. But I think the biggest change came the other day. I think it was October 20th, give or take, or something like that. And so were they really updated and kind of pulled back a little bit to an extent?
And I think so much of it is, okay, so you've announced a policy, but the natural next question for lawyers to ask, in addition to people who are affected, is, okay, so who's subject to the policy and who's not subject to the policy? And very, very gratefully, people who have H-1Bs approved or pending as of September 21st, you're exempt. If you were selected in the 2025 lottery, if you are inside the United States, if you are outside of the United States, you are exempt from the $100,000 fee, which is great.
Yeah.
A lot of, again, one of the only feasible ways for international students to remain in the United States is often an H-1B cap selection. It's not always, but it might be the only way that they can remain. So a lot of companies, of course, were like, oh my gosh, we spent so much time hiring and training and investing this foreign student that we hired. How do we keep them, right? Did we just get rug pulled? And the answer is no. But that being said, there are some restrictions that we are looking at that have been evaluated by the government. The first one is, if you are in the United States and you are seeking to change from visa, whatever visa you have before, to an H-1B, you are exempt from the fee, right? This is, again, a specific program meant to keep foreign students in the United States. If you come here and you spend your good tuition money on a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or an advanced degree, and you want to stay and use those skills to further the American people and our businesses, absolutely. Come on in and stay.
Yeah, and just change is a term of art that the government likes to use when you're going from non-immigrant to non-immigrant. So a lot of the times it's the people who are students changing from an F1 to an H-1B.
Yep.
There's also another term just called adjustment of status, where you're adjusting from a non-immigrant to an immigrant. So these are all different terms of arts, but the gist of it that they released about a week ago or so was that people who are doing a change of status from within the U.S. and do not leave will not be subject to this $100,000 fee.
And that's true even if you do travel later, right? So, if you congratulations, you got your H-1B approved, and now you want to go home and show your family, your beautiful new visa, right? You still have to go and make a stop at the consulate abroad, but you're not subject to the $100,000 fee because you change status from, let's just say, F1 student or M1 student, J1 visiting scholar or researcher, or all sorts of other issues, that you can have, to H-1B.
Yeah, and that's once it's approved. So, but you cannot leave after you file the application before it's approved, because when you file an application for a change of status, I don't want this to get too boring for everybody, but you're also seeking to extend your status, and if you leave, you technically abandon it. So just students, if you're listening to this, you just need to be very careful. Contact an immigration attorney.
Please listen to your employer's immigration attorney.
I think it's really important because a lot of it depends if you're allowed to travel and then when you're allowed to travel. So you need to be very careful with that. But that was a big thing for us when the government pulled back and said, okay, we'll allow change of statuses, because a lot of our clients
Our students.
Our students, and not, we do represent a lot of massive corporations, and a lot of them do benefit from a program like that. But we also work with a lot of smaller, mom and pop shops who find somebody that they love who happens to be from another country, and the fact that they can now. They were really nervous, those types of clients, but the fact that they might be able to change them from one to another is really beneficial for them.
Right. If you're an American student and you graduate, you get your postgraduate work permit, here we call it OPT, right? And you're working for a business that's, 5, 6, 10 people, right? Or even Wilds and Weinberg, right? We have 40, 50 employees?
A little over 40, yeah.
Yeah. If we needed to hire someone.
Still growing.
Still every day. But, if we needed to hire someone, we're not picking someone because they're cheap. We're picking someone because they're good.
Yeah, exactly. So if you filed before that magic date of September 21st, or if you're doing it as a change of status, or you have a valid H-1B, those are the three general exemptions or exceptions that they created. Those are the exemptions, I should say. Then there is an exception as well.
That's right.
If you can prove, and I have it in front of me. If you remember.
Yeah,
it by heart,
I do because the reason that I say that is because I used to represent a lot of medical workers and their employers, whether that's hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, independent clinics and stuff like that. You could be subject to the $100,000 fee, but you can seek an exemption if you and your employer show that your presence in the United States is for the benefit of the American national interest. And the biggest group of people that are likely subject to this policy are going to be physicians, right? They're, due to the quirks of physician immigration, it's actually really hard to move here as a doctor. You and I are definitely going to do another episode on medical workers.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
But you may not be able to change status from one visa to another inside of the United States. It's oftentimes J to H. But you need to come back in, to work your job as a physician, right? It is unquestionably to the American national benefit for physicians to come in here.
Yeah.
And particularly a lot of the physicians end up working in what are called health professional shortage areas or medically underserved areas. So, there are certainly talks of blanket, job codes or blanket professions. But understanding, it's from right now, we don't have any experience as to whether it's going to be a low bar or a high bar.
Yeah.
But my guess is that it's probably going to be a fairly high bar.
Yeah, as it usually is. So in order to be eligible for that exception, you need to show that you'd be here in the national interest of the United States, as you mentioned. You also have to prove that no American is available to fill the role, that the foreign worker possesses no threat to the U.S. security or welfare, and that requiring the $100,000 payment would significantly undermine U.S. interests. Those are the four things you do, and you have to make that application to the government. That you will need a lawyer for, because it's putting together a real argument, factual arguments, legal arguments, and creative arguments all combined together.
Right. If I'm going to serve as a physician in, my wife's hometown of Pickerington, Ohio, right, I think you're probably going to do good numbers.
Yeah.
But, this may often shut some people out, right? Let's say that you are a physician, right? But when you were 15, you got caught for drug possession and you needed a D3 waiver. This may not be able to work for you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be a case-by-case basis, absolutely, that's for sure. And, so it's still up in the air. There's probably going to be some changes, but that's kind of where we stand currently as of this recording. So, depending on when you're listening to this, take all of this with a grain of salt because there may be some changes.
Today is November 5th.
Something like that, yeah.
It's early November,
just
2020,
CYA
2025.
out there, not legal advice, blah, 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 all that.
But in all seriousness, again, as I mentioned earlier, we do consultations, right? And so if your employer doesn't know, if their counsel doesn't know, if they're unrepresented, right, you're always welcome to reach out to us and schedule a consultation where we can review your personalized documents, your personalized situation, and give you a far more concrete answer.
Absolutely, and come up with a plan. And we'll also be honest if there is no plan, because I think we pride ourselves on our tough love and our honesty, and I think that's what sets us apart, is that we won't create something from nothing. We'll create something from something. If there's something there, we'll find it. But if there's nothing, we'll be honest about that as well. But I did want to ask you, and you mentioned a little bit about blanket job codes potentially being exempt in the future. I want to ask you about what you envision might happen, and then just to wrap it up, if you have any advice for individuals, just for your own edification. What I envision is going to happen is that this will be subject to litigation.
100%.
Somebody is going to sue. There already are lawsuits out there about this, and the courts, as they do, are going to have to interpret the law. That's the point of the courts, and how they interpret it might be different from one jurisdiction over the other, but at some point there will be an interpretation, and we'll have more clarity and guidance. And I also do agree that there will be some sort of blanket exception. So for example, perhaps they can make an exception that if you're a business that makes over X amount of dollars a year, you're exempt from it. Or if you make less than X amount of dollars a year, then you're exempt from it. Or if you're a physician, or if you're working as a data analyst, whatever it may be, I think they will come up with some sort of exceptions because they're going to have to. And the Trump administration has a lot of people lobbying them to do things
Absolutely.
like that. But what do you envision?
So there's going to be lawsuits. There already are lawsuits. Particularly one of the plaintiffs that we often see, in immigration litigation that affects businesses is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or the National Federation of independent businesses. Lots of business and trade groups are already organizing and lobbying to make sure that they're able to get the workers that they need. The other thing that we might always want to discuss, right, is what are the alternate visa options? Sometimes there are nationality-specific visas. Sometimes, if you're a real, true, outstanding person, you might be eligible for an O visa, which is something that Josh does as part of his practice. For people who are genuinely extraordinary, outstanding, right? But aside from litigation, we're absolutely going to see certain job codes be accepted. We're going to see greater guidance, and we're certainly going to see a lot more discussion and shaping of what this policy is going to look like, particularly the rules and particularly the guidance that you need to seek an exception. I think also we're going to see companies get a little creative, right? If we can bring you here, for example, on an L visa, if we can set you up for an L visa, if we can bring you here on an E visa, if we can develop alternate visas on which to bring you. And the government did, say we're going to be looking very, very closely at B visas, right? B tourist visas, which famously you're not allowed to work on, to make sure that people are not going to try and skirt this policy. But we have an entire, letter alphabet, as we talked about earlier, of visas that, someone might be eligible for. So, creative problems require creative solutions. And that's something that we really like to do here. So let's see how things work personally for individual people, and let's see what we can do.
Yeah, so litigation, being creative, finding other solutions. I mean, these are things, and just watching the news closely. I mean, we're watching every day for updates, and anytime there's an update, we don't just hear it on the news. We roll up our sleeves and we read what's posted in the Federal Registrar. We read what's posted on the executive orders and dissect the language, and as lawyers try to interpret it in tandem with the case law and with the regulations and the Immigration Nationality Act. So, don't always believe everything you see out there. Contact a lawyer that knows their stuff and can kind of strut their stuff for you and explain it. Last question I have for you, and then we'll wrap it up. And this has been really great. I really thank you so much for this. But any advice that you have, just as a last piece of advice for either students or employers or petitioners or, with regards to the H-1B or just in general?
If you're a student, start the H-1B conversation early. I know so many students who will mark on employment, questionnaires, yes, I am authorized to work permanently in the United States. No, I don't need sponsorship. And then you get hired, and what do? You show up with a work card, right? That needs extending. Or you show up with OPT that's only good for like 6 months, right? That's not going to start off the conversation well with your employer. They're going to get mad at you. Start the conversation early, talk about it often, and let your work speak for itself, right? If you show up and you get hired and you are a rock star, you will be so surprised at how many companies did not previously have a sponsorship policy, but now they do because they love you.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, right, be in communication with, if you're a foreign student, be in communication with your school, right? Talk to your school, because a lot of schools also have a stake in this, right? If we're not creating a sustainable pathway for international students to remain in the United States after they graduate, well, then international student enrollment is going to drop. And the schools are also concerned about that too. Yeah. So make sure to talk to your international officer to make sure that you're in compliance with your student visa and that they know what's going on with the H-1B stuff. Yeah. And then finally, of course, never rule out a temporary trip back home, right? We talked earlier about, setting up for L1s abroad, right? Or even if you are a citizen of a pretty long and growing list of countries, you might be entrepreneurial, right? You might be able to set up your own business. You might be able to join someone else's business, right? So there's always possibilities for you. Just because one window has closed does not mean, another has not opened. So talk to others, talk to experts, talk to your school, and talk to people who are ultimately in charge of making this decision.
Absolutely. It's great advice. And I think just to wrap it up, I mean, it's all about the planning. Plan ahead, plan ahead, plan ahead. Contact an immigration lawyer, think about what you want to do in the future, make those decisions with your friends and family, and don't wait too long, because the earlier you do these things, the easier it is to plan ahead.
We see so many people particularly in, the summer, talking to us and saying, oh, my EAD runs out in a month, in 2 weeks.
People
Talk
wake
to
up so late.
They're like, oh, I need to extend this. And it's just like, that may be a possibility for you. It probably isn't, though, because you waited so long. As soon as you get your EAD, as soon as you understand, I love the United States, I want to stay here, I want to share the talents that I have, with this country, contact an immigration lawyer.
Especially with the new EAD rules, and we're not going to get
into that today.
But with the renewal, again, immigration's changing by the hour nowadays. So EAD renewals, you got to file them early, especially with everything that happened last week. But Nora, thank you so much. This has been absolutely tremendous. We'll have you back on again soon.
My final statement is go Mets.
Yeah, exactly. This file is officially closed. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.